can switch it up. We can switch it up. Switch it up like it's about to go up. Break them like internet. Goofies run up. We leave them in the dead.
You say, okay, I have a lot of money, but you have no money unless you take profits.
When the first ever spot ETF was created for gold 10x.
And the only thing I really knew was Bitcoin at the time, so I just invested very heavily into that. Rode it all the way up.
What's up?
My name is Jeff. Even the creators have said it's going to be the predecessor of CBDC.
What that taught me was that I need to be self-sufficient.
A solid DCA investment strategy, and pretend the red sell button doesn't even exist.
We about to go up like.
The Chinese economy has slipped into a period of deflation following 3 years of strict and stringent COVID-19 lockdowns and a housing market crash. One Chinese economist stated that the current Chinese economy is the U.S. economy from 15 years ago. So what would a Chinese great financial crisis mean to the United States, to Europe, and to the globe? We're going to be talking about that tonight. The SEC announced this week that it plans to appeal a federal judge's ruling that XRP sales did not violate securities laws. Does the SEC have a leg to stand on, or is this just an attempt to save face? We're going to be talking about that as well. The July 2023 CPI report came out this week. Consumer prices rose 3.2% in July, increasing for the first time in 13 months. Even though the overall price rose 0.2% compared to last month, the core CPI, wages, and housing are still showing signs that inflation is cooling. So is this increase something that we need to worry about, or does the Fed appear to have the inflation situation under control? And then finally, Sam Bankman-Fried was jailed this week after a federal judge revoked his bond. SBF is awaiting his trial on house arrest ever since December when he was charged with fraud charges. And we're going to get the panel's opinion on the latest developments in this ugly case. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us tonight. If you guys could, make sure you guys like this video. Make sure you guys comment and subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell. We thank you guys for joining us tonight. Jay, how's it going, buddy? I'm going to kick it over to you. How have things been going? How's your week going?
This week was actually pretty good. A boring market. Nothing really much going on across every single asset that I'm watching, but it's kind of part and parcel of a crab market here in crypto. But business has been pretty good. I got rid of almost everything in my inventory. So there's always that small moment when, as a salesman, you're like, oh yes, I sold everything. And then afterwards you're like, oh shit, I sold everything. I need to find more things to sell. Otherwise, I don't make money. So it's like there's a small bit of relief there. And then you're like, okay, got to go back to work and do more projects. So, but overall, the week has been pretty fun, So it's the same shit, different day, but I like it. I'm a creature of habit, and it gives me peace of mind when I'm in my routine. So, but overall, week's been good. How about you, Brendan? How you been, buddy?
Pretty good, Jay. Thank you. Thank you. Yesterday, obviously I live in Miami, as everyone knows. Yesterday was a boat day for me. And honestly, I barely ever step outside into the sun in the summer in Miami because it's brutal. If you're on the boat, the wind's blowing in your face, it's hot. You go in the ocean, it feels like bath water. It's almost like you're swimming in lava. So there's not anything that's really allows you to cool down in Miami in the summer, but the boat day was a great time. Myself and my girlfriend, my buddy, his fiance, a couple other buddies. So it was a really good time. But then from a market standpoint, as Jay, you had talked about, PulseX have been bleeding. They bumped up a little bit today, but yesterday was a really good opportunity to buy. And I exhausted all of my dry powder into a few different coins. I'm working on getting some more dry powder on the sideline just in case of more dips. And that's the important thing. Every time I'm out of dry powder, I always want to find a way to find more money to buy. I don't want to exhaust my emergency funds from, living from rent, from food, from, having some time with my friends. But when there's a time to buy, you have to buy. And I felt like yesterday was one of those big opportunities. So I will have more money on the sideline soon. I will find some, beg, borrow, steal. Don't recommend it. But, I come from an acting background. So if you need a specific costume for a show, the director would say, you need to beg, borrow, or steal to get what you need for this show. And so I feel like the same for crypto. So I'll find a way legally to get some more dry powder on the side. But yesterday was a great day to exhaust what I had left. Will, let's go. What's up, buddy?
Oh man, I'm super stoked to hear about SBF being thrown into jail over tampering with the witnesses and doing all the silly things. It's like, at first, well, I'm happy in one sense because, like, oh, cool, justice can happen, perhaps. And on the other sense, it's like, I think this is going to be a trap. I don't know if this is real. I don't know if this is actually working out the way it's supposed to be. So I'm approaching it a little bit more cynically there. But what's going on in my life? I'm about to roll up to Indianapolis here in the near future and do some work up there. But other than that, buying crypto, I've been messing around with a little bit of the ICOSA system. I know that Alex just made a fantastic announcement recently about the new icosahedron protocol that he's working on. So I'm a little bit stoked to learn more about that. And I fucked around with Coast, the new onboarding system for Pulse Chain. So it's been an interesting week in the crypto world, boys. It has indeed. Mr. Dace, what's up with you, man?
Hey guys, much the same. Been watching some of the action. I agree wholeheartedly, Brendan. I think yesterday was an incredible day to buy. I did much the same. Onboarded a little bit of what I had left. But I agree. I think if you zoom out a little bit, I've been trying to zoom out a little more and not look at my 1 hour candles there, Jay. But yeah, look, I mean, what I have noticed is I think that we're putting in a bit of a double bottom, particularly on Pulse. I've been watching Pulse chain chart in particular like a hawk, and also been really curious about the Hex to Pulse ratio when you flip it and price it in Pulse, right? So that relationship has been something I've been paying attention to in particular. But no, I just wrapped up an outdoor PA system, my first ever football field. I've usually been doing sanctuaries and big churches, and now I'm expanding into gyms and football fields. And so I also been out in the Louisiana heat on top of the press box. I've got a nice farmer's tan cooking and ready to talk about some crypto.
You know what's funny is before we even started the podcast, when we were just another Telegram group and we were chatting, when we had one of those first initial calls, I think we were all doing our little charting, and I think the numbers that came up would be like an 80% dip on Pulse Chain would have been that 5 range, and then a 90% would have been that 2 range. And if you look at it, where the low is right now, it's like right at that 85% area. So yeah, I think a nice confirmation double bottom could be around the corner, and then it could certainly be ripe for an upward move. What do you guys think on that aspect?
I personally think if you believe in this ecosystem, you can't ask for a better entry point than the prices we are seeing now. Because for quite a bit of us who didn't have the opportunity to sacrifice for the Richard Hart projects, that being Pulse Chain and Pulse X, we're able to get into entry points and prices that are pretty close to some of the biggest whale sacrificers we're able to buy into. Now, once again, it's the caveat is if you believe in the RH ecosystem, but you have to kind of look at the market in a broader context. Dace made a very good point earlier. He's like, I have to stop analyzing this ecosystem on the 1 hour candles. And that's a very good point because there was somebody that I was having a small exchange with the other day because they were, I wouldn't say that they were fudding. They were like, look, I don't like the way that this is looking for Pulse Chain and the ecosystem as a whole, but I'm still buying. And everybody in that specific chat was they were kind of going along with the flow of the emotions that were being felt by this one person, right? And I had to step in there and tell him, like, look, you have to take a step outside of the ecosystem and take a look at the overall market as a whole, because all of the concerns that you just laid out here, that the price is down significantly, it's down anywhere between 85 to 90%. The SEC is suing Richard Hart and his products. And it seems like, and it seems like prices are still bleeding down, and you're worried whether this ecosystem as a whole will do well even during the bull market. And I told him, I'm like, look, uh, take all of your concerns and look at all of the other assets that exist in this space, and tell me, and outside of outside of a select few assets, all of your concerns could be said about all of these other assets, right? A lot of other assets are down anywhere between 85 to 95% still. There are some assets that have not even found their lows yet. They're still looking for their lows. And some of the most popular cryptocurrencies in the space with the largest market caps also have lawsuits pending with the SEC, right? And so you really have to take the time and step outside of the little box that you exist in, because if you have this tunnel vision and all you're seeing is one asset and how bad it's doing in the chart, and you don't take a broader view of the whole market, then you're probably not, one, you're not going to be feeling too well, and two, you might do something that you regret in the future because you think that it's all going down and it's all going to zero, when the rest of the market isn't doing too well either, right? So I think that was a really good point there by Dace, as a reminder to everyone in this space to not be so hyper focused on just one or two tokens, right? Because if you do that, you're not going to have a good time. And it's also not good risk management, right? You, as much as we love the assets that we're investing in, it doesn't necessarily have to be Richard Hart and his ecosystem. If you, like, let's say you're a meme coin maxi and you're only investing in Doge and Sheeb and Pepe and stuff, and you don't have any Bitcoin or Ethereum in your portfolio, you're probably feeling worse, right? The Bitcoin maxis are not feeling too good, but they're up 2x from their rare market lows. So they're in a better spot than most other shitcoiners, right? Or anybody who's just strictly invested into altcoins. So yeah, don't focus on just one asset, and make sure that you hedge your portfolio with some Bitcoin and Ethereum.
So speaking of double bottoms, let's go ahead and roll into TA. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you if you want to go ahead and share screen, and let's take a look at our weekly TA, see what we're looking at, then we can start rolling into the stories.
Yes, sir. Give me 1 second here. Let me pull up my chart. Where is my Bitcoin? There we go. Okay, let me know if you guys can see this okay.
Gotcha, brother.
Yeah, man, we're good.
Okay, so we just passed the daily close, so we are currently on day 13 of the new 60-day cycle. Our cycle low was here on day 47. That is this was actually on the 1st of August this year. It's kind of funny. And I am pretty confident that we are currently in a new cycle. All right. If we were still trying to make a new cycle low here, we're going to need a pretty significant drop in price in order for us to clock in a new cycle low. And even if we did that, I would chalk that up to, okay, here's our current cycle low, but we're still in the new cycle. So far, Bitcoin has been doing pretty much the same thing. I remember, so our last episode was here. Where was that? Here we go. That was on August 6th of last week. And I said exactly the same thing that I'm probably going to say now, that Bitcoin is doing a whole lot of nothing, right? It's been crabbing around, this $29,000 area, and it's really having a difficult time making a move up or down. If you guys remember from last week, I said that if we were to make a bullish move up and maintain that bullish momentum, we would need to, let's take this fib retracement from our swing high to swing low. We would need to reclaim this 0.382 fib level at 29,815. If you notice here, that following Tuesday, that following Monday and Tuesday, right? After our Sunday episode, Bitcoin made this move upwards and tried to reclaim that 0.382 level, but it failed to close above it. It tried once again that following Wednesday and once again failed to close above it. And now we are resuming our downwards trend. And if you notice, I have this downwards, the short-term downward sloping trend line that we have been forming since the second week of July over here. And it seems like Bitcoin is now trying to use that trend line as support, right? And to be quite honest with you, if we were to head down lower, I don't think that we head any lower than our cycle low here of 28,580. And the reason why I say that is, one, because we have that downward sloping trend line that it's probably going to use as support. And two, as the weeks go on and on, right? We've had such a long time going sideways, right? As I mentioned last week, this is probably it's been quite a while in Bitcoin's history since we've had such a period of low volatility, right? And the longer we spend going sideways, the closer that we get to interacting with this green long-term upward sloping trend line, right? And if we zoom out slightly here, what you notice is that since the beginning of the year, since January, every single time that Bitcoin has interacted with this trend line, it has been followed by a very bullish move upwards. And so, to be quite honest with you personally, I like that during the past few months, we've had such a low period of volatility, because that means that it was just a much longer time for me to DCA into fairly good prices, whether that's for Bitcoin or for Ethereum or for altcoins that you're willing to hold long term. We've been blessed by quite a few months of almost very little to no volatility, so you were able to grab some of those coins for very good prices. Because if this pattern were to remain, as soon as we interact with this trend line here, we're, once again, right, I'm not going to assume that the pattern will break until it breaks. And if we make contact with this trend line, then it's probably going to be followed by another bullish move up, right? Just similar to what happened over here during June, similar to what happened over here during March, and once again over here during, this was around December of last year going into January, right? And so it seems like the time for accumulation until we head to that next bullish move up is getting shorter and shorter and shorter, right? This is probably going to make contact within the next week or so, right? As far as what that move to the upside is going to look like, if we do make that bullish move to the upside, our goals still haven't changed. All right, if we zoom out here and take a fib retracement from our all-time high, that's $69,000 all-time high, to our bear market lows, our first target is still that 0.382 level for Bitcoin, around $36,000. Right. Once we reclaim and start closing above that $36,000 area, that's when you can be pretty confident, okay, Bitcoin is really doing its best and really making good progress, maintaining that bullish momentum, because we have reclaimed and started to close above that 0.382 fib level. All right. It's kind of like your canary in the coal mine, as far as like, okay, this price is trying to get bullish. What's the first fib level that we're looking to reclaim? It's always the 0.382 level, right? But before we even get there, we have to reclaim our previous cycle high, right? I think it was probably around when we first started the channel where we spoke about how during this bullish move, one of the reasons why we were so confident that it was going to maintain some kind of bullish momentum over the next few weeks or so was because it reclaimed the cycle high from 2 cycles ago. Well, it's pretty much the same story here. All right. Once Bitcoin broke down, you can notice that it's way below, well, not significantly that far below, but it's still below, right, our 3 most recent cycle highs. And so if we were trying to make a bullish momentum upward, we would like to see Bitcoin reclaim some of our prior cycle highs, which is over here in May, which is about 29. This was what? 29,800, which we tried and failed to do so over the past few days. And then this cycle high here during April, which was at 31,035. All right. So the goal still is $36,000 Bitcoin to reclaim that 0.382 level, but we have to reclaim some of these cycle highs first before we can start talking about any more bullish momentum upwards. In terms of moves to the downside, if we were to move down once again, we are that area around 28,576, which was our cycle low here in early August, is going to serve as strong support, right? Once again, I'm going to take your attention here to this downward sloping trend line that Bitcoin has been using support. But also, if we turn on some of our moving averages, right, that 111-day moving average is sitting at 28,589. Right. And whenever Bitcoin interacts with that price, when it's above it, it has it's over its history, it's used it as pretty good support, right? It tends to bounce off that 111-day MA and use it as support. All right. And then also, if we zoom out, so we're at the daily chart here. I always encourage you guys to zoom out into your weekly and your monthly charts when you're doing your analysis, so you have a broad spectrum view of the market. If we turn on our Bollinger Bands here, you notice that Bitcoin, even though we have some crab movement, you notice that every single time it's come down, it's interacted with this 20-week moving average, and it's used that 20-week moving average as support. All right, so Bitcoin has been using that 20-week moving average fairly well as support. So that's another indicator for you guys to say, okay, around that 28,500, we have quite a bit of indicators telling us that if Bitcoin was to go down to that price, it's going to use it as support. One is the 111-day moving average, and then also this 20-week moving average as well. And if we zoom out into the monthly, right, Bitcoin is still well above that 20-month moving average, which is at 27,685. So overall, even though our market is pretty boring, you can have some confidence because every single time the bears have tried to take over and take over significantly, right, really push the price to the downside, right, these moving averages have acted as fairly strong levels of support, and the bears have been able to use it as leverage in order to push that price back up. Right, now that we're back here on the daily, what do we notice here? We notice that these Bollinger Bands are once again pinching into Bitcoin. It's trying to trap it once again between a rock and a hard place. And whenever that happens, usually is followed by a period of volatility, right? Because price wants to push the Bollinger Bands to the upward or to the downside. Right. And so that's happening once again. Every single time this has happened over the last few times this year, right? When the Bollinger Bands have gotten really, really close and pinched Bitcoin and pushed it against the wall, right? Usually that week, the following week we've experienced some kind of volatility, whether to the upside or to the downside. So just keep your head on a swivel and make sure you're paying attention to the macro news, some of which we're going to be going over for today, so that when price does start to move, you have a plan of action in place, right? That's all I have for TA today. If you guys have any other things to add, please do so.
I would like to add a couple things. Just to read what you said on that upward trend line. I've been looking at that for the last few weeks, and it's important, right? A lot of people say, hey, you're in a bear market. People think we're going to go down really far still. Look, black swan events, volatility that happens, you can't adjust for that. But just based on the charts, just based on the market, it looks very strong that we're in a bull market, right? Every time it hits that line, we don't just move up a little bit, we move up a lot. And therefore, that upward trajectory is very indicative of a fairly strong start to an early bull market. And I think that is something that should not be forgotten about. And when you have opportunities to make buys like I did yesterday, or for me personally, nothing we talk about today is financial advice, or on this show is ever financial advice. It's just what we see in the markets and what we're doing personally, but everyone has to make their own decisions. But for me yesterday, as I continue to see opportunities where coins hit areas where I think that it's going to be hard to fall below, it's a buy opportunity. That's for me personally. And so I don't want to miss out waiting for things to go too low. I'm just ready to keep going up, and we'll see what happens from here. But so far, we're looking very strong. And even Pulse, right? Pulse, Hex, Pulse X have been going down pretty steadily, but the overall market's been strong. So when you say, hey, when there's a lot of FUD surrounding a coin, with a lot of FUD surrounding an ecosystem, that generally means there could be a buy opportunity, especially if the overall market is strong. But doesn't mean just put everything into one coin or into one ecosystem. As Jay said, personally, I'm also looking at increasing my Bitcoin holdings and Ethereum holdings right now, because look, the scarcity of Bitcoin is a real thing. And if institutions don't want to sell in 5 years or 10 years, then that scarcity is only going to increase. And therefore, that price can grow exponentially, maybe more than we anticipated originally. You know, if Bitcoin could ever get to the market cap of gold, we're looking at a very, very large increase over the next few years, right? Bitcoin's at 30,000, you know, a small market cap compared to gold. If Bitcoin were to get to gold's market cap on today's prices, we'd be in like the $600,000, $700,000 price range. So the opportunity for Bitcoin as what we consider to be a safe bet, there is still opportunity for a large upside because of scarcity and just because of overall worry of the world economic market.
You know, the people that are going to make money in this upcoming bull cycle, what they're doing right now is they're quietly buying. They're accumulating their coins right now during this boring period, during this quiet period, because once the market starts getting noisy and once more and more news channels are starting to put Bitcoin price up on the chart, and once Bitcoin starts getting to new all-time highs, that's pretty much it. I mean, the buying opportunity for that cycle is pretty much going to be over at that point. So anybody that's going to make it in this upcoming bull cycle, they're quietly and slowly making their DCAs right now. They're accumulating. They're gathering up more and more assets for the upcoming bull run. Jay, did you want to respond to Brendan? I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No worries. I just kind of wanted to reiterate some of the things that you and Brendan said, right? That the people who know better, right, who can kind of read between the lines, are accumulating slowly within this market, right? I think I can speak to all of us here when I say that when you go through social media, there are still those perpetual bears that are still telling you that, hey guys, this looks like a fake out. I think we're going to head down back to 15,000 or lower. And, you know, at a certain point, if you keep saying the exact same thing over and over, that you're going to be right, like one of those times, and then you're going to like, see, I told you so. But, you know, I have to really ask, I've been hearing the bears talk about us going back down below 15K Bitcoin since the beginning of this year, right? And it has not happened, especially when you consider the fact that for the past few months, Bitcoin has been hovering around this $29,000 area. If you look around 2022, and even in 2021, you'll notice that this $29,000 area actually served as pretty damn good support. At like during the drops on our way to the $69,000 all-time high, Bitcoin has dropped several times around this $29,000 area to use as support before going back up. And it was also actually that it was a small chunk of price action that was serving as support right before the Luna collapse, right? So you could see that the market right now is looking at this $29,000 area as, okay, we finally reclaimed it, right, after collapsing from Luna, and this is actually the price area where everybody was still kind of considering that super cycle, where it's like, hey, Bitcoin isn't done making a run to all-time highs. We're still going to make a run to like maybe 100,000 or so. So Bitcoin is at that price range that everybody was kind of eyeing, thinking, okay, we're actually going to make a move from here. So there's a lot of psychological support also that exists around this 29K area, right? Because they used that as support quite a significant number of times on the way up to 69,000. And also it was the price point that we lost during the Luna collapse. So you're absolutely correct in saying that people who are going to make it are silently accumulating at this price. And that's why we're not being too silent about it, because we also want everybody here to win. We want you guys in the audience to win. So if you're a perpetual bear and all you have sitting on the side is dry powder, and you have not deployed any of that dry powder in the market, I'm sorry to say, but there's about 6 months left before the Bitcoin halving, give or take a month or two. Right, so there's not much time left for you to accumulate before price really starts running against you. So don't get left behind. Don't get left behind because you're a perpetual bear. You're gonna be a sad bear. You're gonna be a sad panda during the bull market if you and all you have to show for it is a big stack of dry powder that has not done any multiples.
Time to pump it up. Don't you know? Pump it up. It's time to pump it up. Don't you know to pump it up? Don't miss out on those pumps, baby.
All right, good stuff, Jay. Hey, for everyone watching and for everyone catching this on replay, if you guys haven't had the chance, you guys are curious about TA, go back through the videos, go and check out Jay's DR insights on price-based analysis for technical analysis. Be on the lookout for his episode 2 for that coming out. But very good information on there for you guys to be able to keep up for when he's doing his charting and such. Full of gems, full of knowledge in there. So with that being said, let's go ahead and transition to the first story. For those of you that are watching live, if you guys go into the descriptions, the links for the stories that we're going to be covering are in the descriptions. While you guys are in that description, make sure you guys are clicking on the Telegram. Make sure you guys are joining that Telegram as well. I'm going to get the slide pulled up. All right, here we go. Our first story of the evening. We're going to be talking about China. Again, I know we led last week off talking about Hong Kong. But yeah, this week, after a consultation with the other panelists, we determined that China, even though it had been a second week in a row, it's still the fact that their economy right now is slipping into a period of deflation is extremely important. We have to keep this stuff in mind. So pretty much what China's going through is the polar opposites of what the United States and Europe are going through. The United States and Europe were fighting high inflation. All right. What China's going through is the opposite. Their prices, their goods, their wages are going down. All right. So it's not inflation that they're dealing with, but they're dealing with deflation. So the prices and wages in China have been stagnating or falling despite the People's Bank of China cutting interest rates and pumping cash into the population. All right. Now, this is because China has endured 3 years of stringent COVID-19 policies, 3 years of COVID mandates, lockdowns, all the stringentness going on with the Chinese government, putting it on their people. And as a result of that, they've also endured a housing market crash. So if we take a look back to where the United States was in 2008, it's interesting that you can draw such a similarity between where the United States was and where China is today. When you think of the housing market crash that China went through, the fact that their goods, their services, their wages, they're falling down. This is causing Chinese households to stockpile cash into savings as opposed to going out and spending money. Now, of course, when the population decides, hey, I'm not going to go out and spend money, I'm going to take my hard-earned money and I'm going to put it in savings because I don't know what's going to happen in this economy. That's going to cause the economy to get a little bit weaker. All right. So as a result, the economy is slowing, leading to even more lower wages and even lower consumer spending. So it's a rotating cycle that is happening the opposite way of what was going on in the United States. So the first question that I want to pose to the panel, and it doesn't matter who answers first, whoever wants to hop off, but or whoever wants to hop off of mute first. But what would this mean for, because China has the second largest economy in the world. And if they're going through a period like this, what could this mean globally? And then what would it mean for Europe and then the United States? Is, how concerning is this? And is this something that people need to be paying close attention to? Somebody hop off. Talk to me about it.
I guess I'll go first if anyone else wants to take the stage. It's interesting, right? Because yes, China is the second largest economy in the world, but also their economy isn't dependent on the people that are in China. Their economy is dependent on exporting goods to other countries. So if you start to see a downtrend in economic issues in Europe, in the United States, if you start to see the United States government saying, hey, let's not spend so much money on China, then institutions are going to be putting less money into the Chinese economy, which are going to further drive down their prices. In fact, the Chinese exports dropped 14% in the last month. That's a very significant number. So if you think about China, you think about the people there, it's a communist government. Those people, outside of the people that are very high up, that have a lot of money, that's not the people that are pushing the goods. They're not the people that are raising the economy in China. It's us. It's the United States. It's Europe. And if we aren't investing in goods and services that are coming out of China, then they're going to have a very big problem with economic deflation and reduction in GDP. Their GDP has fallen in line with their fall of exports and with their fall of inflation. So yes, they might be deflationary, but they're having a big problem looming because the exports and the problems that are still posing a threat in the United States and Europe are making big tolls in China. Another thing that's hurting them is the real estate market. They own a lot of real estate around the world, and some of that real estate is dropping in value just because of economic situations. And so in the short term, they are really seeing a downturn there as well. So, well, I don't think that China is in jeopardy long term of having a big downturn. I think that, the big issues from a government standpoint between the heightening issues with China and the United States, China and Europe, China backing, Russia and these other things, a lot of the world is really trying to pull back in the money that they're putting into the Chinese government, the Chinese economy. And if that's your number one way of growing as a country, then you have a very big issue from a self-sustaining standpoint. We talk in crypto about being self-sustaining, and the Chinese economy is not. They depend far too much on exporting goods to the United States and to Europe, and therefore they don't control a lot of what happens within their economy. Well, they are, yes, a dictatorship that allows their people not to be the sole proprietors and the people that are the biggest investors in their economy. So if we fail, China fails. And for a long time, me personally, I didn't understand the correlation between the Chinese economy and the United States economy. I thought, hey, we're too dependent on Chinese goods. So, China keeps selling us stuff too low. But I never realized for many years how dependent China is on the United States. If we don't buy their goods, they have a big problem because we are by far the number one government, people, economy that drives their economy. So it's a very interesting thing to say. If China fails, then the United States doesn't have as many goods. But now you're starting to see the United States build more factories to be less dependent on the Chinese exports, especially in the technology standpoint. So we'll see what happens. But it's a very interesting outcome. And I think there are a few things that if you just look at it on a surface that you might miss. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah, one of the things that really caught my attention was when actually Josh made the comparison about how the Chinese economy is kind of a mirror to what the U.S. economy was experiencing. I believe Josh said it was somewhere around the 2008, 2012, like that span of time, when because our economy was suffering pretty significantly. What the federal government did was they decreased the interest rate so low, so that it was kind of a way for them to encourage people to borrow money from the banks and to spend money on things like real estate, buying cars, buying goods and stuff like that, because there was basically zero interest imposed on you for borrowing money. And it kind of it's a it creates this picture of exactly how different the two economies might be, right? Because here in America, it seems like when the government is encouraging people to spend, people have a general tendency to spend, right? People overspent during that time span, even even during Android 19, right? When there were all of these stimulus checks being pushed out, there were all of these different loans, and banks were encouraging people to take out loans to kind of stimulate the economy back up. Americans aren't shy about spending money, but it's funny to see that kind of approach in a different country, right? Like China. And I'm from the Philippines, and what I've noticed with Asian countries in general is that their cultures are generally very conservative when it comes to fiscal policy, right? And like, would the nuclear family always encourages, hey, you know what, you got to save for a rainy day, you can't overspend, go get a good education so you get a good job, so you create a good income for yourself, so just in case shit hits the fan, you have something saved on the side, etc., etc. And it seems like they're kind of reacting in the opposite way that Americans would usually react, right? If the government kind of encourage people spending by lowering interest rates and giving out loans, people have a tendency to spend. But it seems like the Chinese people are doing the opposite, right? They're just like, look, we're not going to spend any more money, even though prices across all of these different goods and services are down. We're still not going to spend money because we know that if shit hits the fan, we don't want to be caught without any kind of savings. So it's just kind of interesting how different the people in the West react to something like this to versus the people in the East in the Chinese economy. As far as what's going to happen if the Chinese economy does start collapsing, well, it certainly will be easier for the United States to maintain that number one position, right? That's number one. And then also, Brendan made a really good point about how the Chinese are very dependent on exporting goods and other countries buying from them, right? And let's say that they weren't able to produce the amount of volume of goods that the United States used to buy from them. Well, maybe this is going to serve some kind of impetus for the US to start producing a lot more here at home, right? And to kind of push the production of local US markets up a little bit more, because now we can't rely on the Chinese producing a lot of those goods. Now, obviously, I think the people here in the United States are going to have to come at a crossroads where, okay, we were buying from China before because the goods were inexpensive. But now, how do we balance that here with, okay, we can't rely on them for cheap goods anymore. So we have to bring a lot of that manufacturing back home. How do we balance out the production level with with the price that the American people are willing to spend on, right? Because that's always kind of the gripe with a lot of folks is that, look, the reason why we kind of buy from other countries and we don't really buy domestic products is because if you buy from home, it's a lot more expensive, right? And so I think it's going to be a really interesting balancing act to observe over the next few years if the Chinese economy does keep heading into that decline, that downwards decline, and they lose their number 2 spot in terms of the world's the second largest economy in the world. So, I don't. Did you guys have any thoughts on that? There was just like a few observations that I made based on the data that Josh presented and Brendan's comments.
My only thoughts are I don't really have anything insightful to add. I'm just musing about like what is the difference in the quality of life for a Chinese person, the amount of money that they can spend on things versus like an American person. So like if our entire economy revolve, or not entire our entire economy, but a lot of their economy relies on them producing incredibly cheap goods for us to then consume over here in America. Like we're buying what we consider cheap goods. I just wonder why like the Chinese aren't buying these same cheap goods, you know? So like how much more wealthy are we here in like how much more wealthier are we over here in America than the normal, you know, day-to-day folks over there in China? Like what is the different quality of living? It just makes me appreciate, you know, living here in the West a little bit more, knowing that like, hey, I could like I can go work at, you know, some random ass place and still maybe not make a living, but like be okay. However, like they're like we're not even buying their cheap crap, and they can't buy their cheap crap, and so their whole economy is tanking because they rely so heavily on us buying the trash that they make. So, just some things I was thinking about. Nothing really crazy.
It certainly makes you appreciate living here in the West a lot more, right? Because that's a really good point. You also have to take into consideration that the Chinese have the second largest economy in the world, but you're right, Will, in saying that uh, they they produce things that we buy because they're cheap, right? Not necessarily because they're of the highest quality, right?
It's
And
cheap for us, you know.
yeah,
Like so, like what would it be for them if they were to buy the same like crap that we buy at Walmart? You know, like if I go and buy like a ruler at Walmart, let's say, just a simple piece of wood with some ink on it, you know, that costs like $1, right? But like we're getting all that stuff like shipped over here, you know, from their country because it's just so ridiculously cheap. So like what, like it just you know begs the question like how much wealth do we have as a day-to-day individual versus like the wealth they had? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
quite,
cut you off.
no, no, no. I mean, no. You bring up a good point, and I think it's quite a lot. That's why I always harp on people when they fail to. I don't like ungrateful folks, especially
Mhm.
as an immigrant who came here to the United States and experienced exactly what life was like in a world country. Because I was born in the Philippines in the 90s, and we were still a developing nation, right? We were still pretty much a third world country. I always tell the people stories, right? Growing up, you had to grab you had to get your water from a well, right? We didn't have indoor plumbing or heating or cooling. So when you went to the bathroom, you had to pour water down the toilet because there was no flushing system, right? With no toilet paper. So I tell people this story all the time when I was living in the province in the Philippines. Dude, like you need to take a dump, you go in the woods, you take a banana leaf to wipe your ass, and you dig a hole in the ground, you take a shit in the ground, wipe your ass with a banana leaf, and then fucking fill the hole back up, right? It's like in the morning when before we go to school, we didn't have hot or cold water, right? So what you would do is you would wake up extra early in the morning, you would boil water, you would mix it with the freezing water, and then you'd get like semi-warm water to take a bath with because we didn't have showers, right? So that it wouldn't be freezing, and before the water wouldn't be freezing when we took a bath before we went to school, right? So it's like being able to live here in the West, it really did a very good job exactly of showing me exactly how good we have it here in the States. Because when you consider that the Chinese have the second largest economy in the world, and a good amount of their population don't experience the same kind of financial freedom and freedom in general that we have here in the West, it just makes me even more thankful that I'm here and not over there or anywhere else. Right. I think if you took some of these people who who always who always harp on America as being a very bad country, and we're not a perfect country, right? But if you took some of those people and you you airdrop them into some of these like still developing countries, they'd realize real quick exactly how good we have it here in the States. So uh, I just wanted to comment on that, Will, because it always like realizing exactly where I came from when I was a kid makes me so grateful to be here living in the States.
Another aspect that you have to think about is that it's a communist state, right? So China's a communist state. So the means of labor, the means of production, it's all controlled by the state. The wages, they're all controlled by the state. That's how it's vastly different from the United States. And I don't know so much as to say that like people can't go out and buy the cheap stuff that, you know, is made in China. Chinese citizens couldn't go to the store and get it. I don't know. I don't know if there's anything saying that they can't do that, but there definitely is a difference in the wealth between Chinese citizens and U.S. citizens. And something that you also have to keep in mind is that given their current situation, we have to take a look at how the whole COVID-19 situation was even handled. Let's go country to country. Let's look at how the United States handled it versus how China handled it. You know, sure, both countries locked down, but the United States government sent out stimulus checks and they flushed the entire system with cash through the Federal Reserve. And that's the reason why we have the inflation that we have today. That didn't occur in China. There wasn't any help that was given out in the Chinese government. So as a result of that, what the citizens had to do is they were staying home. They weren't making any money. So what did they had to rely on debt. Right. And once all the debt and all that credit ran out, what happened? They ran into a situation where their housing market took a dump. Only now is the Chinese government really trying to simulate anything because they're in this entire situation. What's funny is if you look at how the United States handled COVID versus how the United States handled the 2008 great financial crisis, we can see a lot of comparisons between China now and the United States back in 2008. Because let's take a look at what happened in the United States. You know, the United States, they bailed out the banks. They didn't bail out Main Street. They bailed out Wall Street, right? So when everyone's 401ks and when everyone's retirement savings is crashing through the floor because all these big banks are losing money, what did the government do for the average person? They didn't do anything. They didn't send out the large amount of stimulus that we saw after the COVID-19 during the COVID-19 area. Right? All the bailouts occurred to the banks. They didn't really happen to the average person. So what happened when the U.S. economy started to slow down, right? And what happened when those banks fell? Well, we had a housing market crash. We all remember the housing market crash. If you saw The Big Short, you know, I watched The Big Short this week in preparation for this episode. Absolutely love that movie. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. I can watch it religiously. But if you take, you know, so the housing market crashed, there's no real help coming in from the United States government. And we endured that 2 or 3 year period where we had to get to the bottom. And if you look at China, that's a lot of what has already had. There's no government help until now. Now they're starting to flood the market. You know, the Chinese government is starting to flood the market with money. But there was no help in the time being. It's been 2 years, 3 years since COVID happened. It's been 3 years of Chinese citizens that, because of the strict mandates, they weren't able to get up and go to work. So they had to rely on their credit cards. They had to rely on maybe taking out a second mortgage on their home or something like that. So they're debt heavy right now. They're debt heavy. They just dealt with a housing crisis. So their houses are, you know, probably worth significantly less than what they purchased them for. And that's causing the economy to slow. So it's interesting how if you look at 2008 in the United States versus 2023 right now in China, you can almost use 2008 in the United States as a roadmap. So yeah, China, you're about to go through some difficult stuff. If this stuff doesn't pick up, and what that also has me worried about is you also have to think about the geopolitical side of things. What happens if China slumps more and more into a financial problem? What does that do? That might open up the reins for them to invade Taiwan. It's been on the news, you know, it's been on top of everybody's mind. You know, what happens when the citizenry of a country starts to really feel those economic problems? You know, they get into a revolutionary spirit. They start to revolt. So what would the Chinese government do in order to avert that? They might invade Taiwan. They might, you know, turn their military forces towards a direction that we don't even see coming right now. So it's a whole lot of different other aspects that I think are important to think about when we think about this sort of thing. I know I just said a lot there. Does anybody have any follow on, or did I spark any, you know, a thought or anything off of what I said?
Yeah, I mean, between what you and Jay said, I think that one other thing to keep in mind when it comes to China and their economy is that, you know, in the United States, pretty much every family, once their kids leave the home, they live on their own, right? So each person is contributing to the economy of the United States. Whereas in China, most of the time, 3 generations at least are living together. So it's very common for grandparents, their children, and their children to all live together. So if you have, you know, 1 generation versus 3 generations living together, in one of those 3 generations that's providing for all of them, well, they're going to have a lot less money to spend on extracurricular activities than they do here in the United States, right? They need to spend money so that they can live, their children can live, their parents can live. And so that really changes the overall outlook on the economy in China. And so that's very interesting. We'll also have to see how things change in China with the massive, male-dominated population because of some, government rules over the past 20 plus years. And so we'll see how that happens. But one thing to keep in mind and to look at is how Americans spend money as singular units living together versus the Chinese, where they have generations living together that they have to support. And so they don't have that extra money all the time to be spending like we do on whatever we want. Might just buy some Pokemon cards tomorrow instead of, having to spend money on my child's milk or my parents', diapers. I don't know. But, it's a really important, it's a serious thing to keep in mind. And it's a very big difference between how the Chinese live and the United States live. And that is, again, they can't afford for everyone to live alone because the government isn't going to subsidize them enough to do so. That's where you come a communist government versus, coming to the United States and have the opportunity to live for yourself, to make a real living, to work hard and to make living not only for yourselves, but for future generations. And that's what we want. That's what we want for all of you that are watching us, an opportunity to make enough money to not only support yourselves, but the generations that come after you. And I believe personally that crypto is one of the ways that we can create financial freedom. And they don't have that opportunity in China.
Oh, very good points there, Brendan. It's actually not uncommon for Asian cultures where the children. One of the things that our parents always encourage us to do is that when we get older, that the children are going to be responsible for taking care of the last generation of people, right? And so I think you made a very good point there in saying that when it comes to the Chinese in particular, but not just them, Asian countries in general, is that as opposed to individual households from a single family contributing to the economy, you maybe have a single breadwinner taking care of not only his wife, his children, but also the parents of not just his parents, but also the parents of his spouses. Right. And so you have a singular household. Usually you have a singular person earning the income for that household, as opposed to here, where it's not very uncommon to see even people who should be retired and shouldn't necessarily be working anymore, but they're still out there working here in the West. And so that's still providing some kind of stimulus to the economy, right? Because those people are still out there working and they're still spending money. And that's not necessarily the case for Asiatic countries. And it certainly doesn't seem like that's the case for the Chinese as well. Also, there's another really good point that you brought up, because inherently, the Chinese, they're still a pretty much I guess, how do I say this? How do I say this in a PC manner? Let's just say that they're still being run overwhelmingly by the patriarchy. And so because of that, I don't know if the data is similar there, but how here in the West, we know that the overwhelming majority of the financial decisions and the spending, usually the woman in the household is the one responsible for making those kind of financial decisions, right? If it was the case also in the Chinese society, right? If it's predominantly if there's more men than there is women, that's also another indicator that tells me they might not be spending as much as they can, because men in general are probably going to be a lot more frugal. Once again, I'm trying to draw parallels between the Chinese and the United States here. I'm not sure if the data exactly plays out the same way, but if it does play out the same way, and then the men are also fairly conservative with their spending, that's another trouble that they're going to have, right? Especially if their population is playing out to be that there's more men than women. And I think it's, there's an argument that could be made because people in China aren't having as many children as they are before, right? So,
well, it's interesting. I just want to add one more thing. Sorry, they aren't, but the government is actually trying to have them have more children now, right? They used to have that one child rule. Once you have a male child, you can't have another child. they're now pushing Chinese households to have 3 children. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen, but for a long time, they imprinted on Chinese men and women that, hey, having more than 1 or 2 kids is not good. And so women are actually having psychological issues when the government's now telling them that they should have 3 kids, because for 20 years plus, they were told that's wrong. So how do you change the perspective of the people that you have, essentially brainwashed into thinking that having more than 1 or 2 kids is anti-Chinese or anti, Homo sapien? And now they're not only seeing the problems from their previous decisions, but now as they're trying to, essentially transfer from 1 to 2 kids into three kids for every household, they're having a hard time pushing that on their people, because for so long, again, they told them that, hey, having 3 kids is anti-Chinese and anti-human, because we can't have a big population. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, it's hard to kind of pivot from a behavior that you've been taught since you were young. It's kind of hard to pivot from that when that's the overall environment that you were raised in. Like, hey, everybody's only going to have 1 child and that's it, because there's too much. We have too many people here. And also, I think that's probably one of the contributing factors to why, in general, they have a very difficult time innovating, right? Because I think it's pretty safe to say, or pretty safe to assume, that like a lot of the innovation is going to come from future generations, right? It's like our kids and our kids' kids are going to be the ones that build on the technologies that we develop now. But if you're a country that doesn't necessarily encourage people to have children, then your innovation will also remain stagnant. And furthermore, like, people have a tendency to kind of dig their feet into the ground and be very entrenched in their ways, right? They're not very, I guess, open to change. And so if you have this combination of people not having many kids, and so you don't have the next generation to innovate, and then you also have the current population getting older and they don't really want to change the way that they do things, it's kind of a perfect storm in a bad way, because then you're not only going to lose the innovation that your next generation might produce, but the people that are currently living in your country are also very anti-change, right? So they're not willing to adopt any new policies to potentially change their current circumstances. So that's a lot going against their favor, man.
Yeah, and Jay, sorry, I know we need to move on to the next topic, but if you have one person that needs to support their entire family, innovation generally comes when you have an opportunity to study and spend time learning one topic. If you need to spend time supporting your family, then you don't have the time to spend learning to innovate. 100%, that's the same problem that China is struggling with. I'm going to say that really, really quick and to the point.
No, I love the back and forth, guys. That's why we're doing the show. It doesn't, I personally don't care if a segment runs a little bit longer, if the conversation is meaningful and you guys are having a good time having the conversation, then we can stick on a topic for as long as we want to.
I thought Josh was going to say, I don't care if the Chinese economy collapses.
But yeah, let's go ahead and segue to the next topic. So while I'm pulling up that slide, you guys that are watching live, you guys could just go ahead and hit that like button. Make sure you guys comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Leave us a nice comment down there. But yeah, let's go ahead and move on to the next story here. All right, Dace, I want to come to you with this. So XRP, a federal judge came out a month or two ago, said, hey, listen, the sale of XRP tokens, the sale offerings, it's not violating any securities laws. Well, the SEC has since come back, and this week that they announced that they plan to appeal that decision. So, Dace, I want to ask you this, and then we can open it up. I guess, if we can have some sort of conversation with the whole panel. But does the SEC actually have a leg to stand on here, or are they sort of grasping at straws? Is this, an attempt to save face. What do you think on that aspect as far as the SEC appealing the federal judge's decision? And you're muted if you're talking. All right, Dace, I'm going to give you another second or two to come off of mute, and then I'll kick it to somebody else on the panel.
Okay, while Dace gets his stuff now there are two.
Yeah.
What is going on?
Hey, Dace, are you able to come off of mute, buddy, or no?
Well, now it seems like there are two of him.
Yeah. All right. Hey, Jay, do you want to, give your
while
input here,
we
and then
sort out the
we can kick it
technical
around?
difficulties, I don't know how we
Yeah.
we managed two here. Okay, so Josh, when you asked if the SEC has a leg to stand on, well, the reason I think why their appeal might have some tailwind to it is because, okay, so within the same district, right, we had Annalisa Torres, Judge Torres, say that the programmatic sales of XRP were not violating any securities laws. However, there was another judge in the same district that was actually taking care of the litigation between the SEC and Luna, Terraform Labs. And when Luna filed a motion to have those very similar charges dismissed, that specific judge actually, he basically slapped it down. And so now what they're trying to do is trying to kind of iron out the details between both of them, because the judge in charge of the case with Terra Luna said that every single sale of their token actually contributed to the growth of the company, and therefore those investors were expecting profit from the work of the folks working at Terraform Labs, right? And so the thing is, you would really have to dive into the details as to why that judge in the Luna case rejected their appeal to have that case dismissed versus the details between the case in XRP, because Judge Torres' decision was very specific. It's only when it comes to the programmatic sales of XRP that we're not considering as securities, right? And that's just to say that those programmatic sales, if you look at the definition of what programmatic sales are, it's just basically the sales done by a computer, right? And so there's actually there's no person sitting in front of you telling you, hey, I want you to invest in this company. Do you want to invest your money for this common enterprise, and then you're going to expect a return in the future from the work that we're doing in this company, right? And so what the SEC is trying to appeal, I'm assuming, has to do with the details behind the case with Terra Luna, right? So they're observing what's going on with that case and saying, okay, I think because the same judge in her district denied their motion to dismiss the charges, that we might have something here, right? And so whether that's going to turn into something significant, I'm not too sure. We kind of have to let this play out and see how one XRP or Ripple as the company responds to the claim, right? And see exactly how the case with the SEC and Luna, how that plays out, right? You're going to have to really analyze the details between each case to see exactly what the SEC is arguing for.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, Jay. There's two parts, right? There's the sale of XRP to institutions and the sales to individual buyers. So when someone like myself or Jay or anyone else is buying XRP, we don't have an investment contract because we're just purchasing from whatever exchange or whoever else is in existence, right? So we're not buying directly from them. But XRP could potentially be a security if and when they sell to institutions, because there's a contract, and an understanding of increased value. So even, let's say, worst case scenario, XRP loses and Ripple loses the appeal from the judge. They're not going to fully lose the entire appeal. They're only going to lose the appeal, in my opinion. Okay, it's just my opinion. When it comes to selling to institutions where there could have been a security contract there, right? An actual contract in discussion one-on-one between Ripple and that institution. But when I purchase from Ripple, there's no institutional contract. There's no contract between us. There's no conversation there. And so there's a big difference between Ripple being a security from person to person versus Ripple to institutions. And that is a very big distinction, because when we're purchasing crypto, we're not having a conversation from each individual exchange or each individual owner of a token. We are just purchasing on a decentralized platform, or maybe on an exchange, but we're not even buying from the exchange. We're only buying tokens from other people that are selling, that are just being, formulated between the exchange and us and them. So that is a very big thing to understand, is that even if Ripple loses, they're not going to lose, in my opinion. I think there's zero chance that they lose, that they're a security when individual buyers purchase. It's only when they literally talk to an institution and try to get them to purchase Ripple, right? You can understand that when you push something in person or via telephone from one company to another company, then there is a potential for a contract there. But individually, there's no contract. So if I'm buying Ripple, or if I'm buying Hex, or if I'm buying Cardano, I'm not talking to Charles Hoskins or to Richard Hart. I'm not talking to any of the people that are working for that company, which are very few, outside of people that are just developing code. So there's no contract there. It's just me wanting to purchase a coin to invest in for the future. But in XRP's case, there is some interesting differentiation between the institutional investors and the individual investors. And I think it's more important for crypto overall when we're talking about the individual investors in a platform versus the institutional investors.
Just one thing, Brendan, to clarify. So when it came to the institutional sales of XRP, so Judge Torres actually found Ripple, the company, guilty when it did come to the institutional sales. So Ripple did lose in that aspect. The appeal that the SEC are trying to make is for the programmatic sales, and also when it came to Ripple giving XRP to investors in exchange for labor, etc. Right? So that's what they're trying to appeal. But when it came to the case of selling to institutional investors, and in that case, Ripple did sell to some institutional investors, they were actually found guilty on those counts. But you made a good point in saying that when we buy from exchanges, right, there's no investment contract. When XRP came to, when Ripple approached their individual investors, there was most certainly probably an investment contract when it came to those folks and the entities that Ripple wanted to get investments from. But if we were buying XRP from exchanges, or if I'm buying Ethereum from Coinbase, or maybe you're buying Phantom from crypto.com, there is no investment contract between myself and the company or the founders of those tokens, right? Like you pointed out. And so it would be very difficult for the SEC to argue, really. But this is just speculation on my end, right? I'm not a lawyer. So I wouldn't be able to tell you the finer details of it, but just looking at it from the surface, right? It's like, okay, if there's no investment contract, if there's nobody that comes to me and says, okay, I need, here, you're going to sign this piece of paper, and what you're going to do is you're going to give the company some money. We're going to give you some of these tokens in exchange. And then here's our roadmap. Here's Here's why this project has value, and here's why we believe it's going to make money in the future. Here's what you can expect in terms of returns, right? There's none of that goes on when I, as an investor, buy Ethereum from Coinbase or buy Ethereum from a decentralized exchange like Uniswap or Matcha or name DEX, insert DEX here. Right? There's none of that going on. And so I don't quite understand how they can make the argument that the programmatic sales did violate securities laws, right? Because there's no investment contract, right? Unless you can prove that Coinbase had everybody sign something whenever they were buying a token off their exchange. Like, how can you possibly make the argument that that's an investment contract, right? It fails the Howey test on every single point. So yeah, I think this is just a way for the SEC to save face. Maybe they see something in relation to their case against Luna that the public is not aware of just quite yet. But to be quite honest with you, I think this is them just trying to save face, right? Because they have to remain steadfast in their attack against crypto. Otherwise, it's kind of like a sign of weakness, and they don't want that. So yeah, I'm with you there, bro. I don't see how any of us buying off an exchange constitutes an investment contract whatsoever.
Yeah, I just think that if even if the SEC wins part of their appeal, they're not going to win the fact that if I'm buying from an open source automated, opportunity, there's nothing there. So they're not going to win the entire appeal. And then even if they win partially the appeal, what happens next? Then Ripple reappeals again, right? And so it's just a continuous. There's no end to the game. But again, I don't see the SEC winning big. I don't see how they can, because like you said, it fails the Howey test in so many different ways. So even if they were to win on some technicality, which what you're talking about, the programmatic sales, that's not sales to everybody still, right? We can still buy automated. We can still buy on exchange. That doesn't affect any of that. That's just one small aspect of how Ripple sells. And so I think this is good. I think it's bullish.
Yeah. Also, something to keep in mind is that the SEC can't appeal yet. The court has to approve their ability to appeal it. So it hasn't, the SEC can't just jump in right away and appeal it. They have to go through a process, and that process is taking place right now. It's something to definitely pay attention to. I do agree. I do think it is bullish. I think that it is important that a precedent needs to be set, and that's exactly what's going to happen here. Is it's going to set a precedent. So, Will, I want you to come in here, hop off of mute. I wanted to get your input on it. Do you have any insights on what we're talking about here?
I am a peanut brain diamond hand. I barely know what a security is. So it's pretty cool that these crypto dudes are winning against the old government. I'm all about it. But as far as the technicalities of what you guys are talking about, I'm just a fucking leaf on the wind floating around here, man.
Here's one last thing I'll say about it, right? Because Josh brought it up. So when they do finally appeal this, right? If they lose that appeal, then it will set a legal precedent. Because right now there's no legal precedent yet, right? There's precedent, but there's no legal precedent, right? A lot of other companies that the SEC has a lawsuit with can refer to the case with Ripple and say, look, there's a ton of similarities between that case and what we're being accused of doing. And because the judge in charge of that case established that both the programmatic sales to individuals did not violate any securities laws, and that's exactly what we're being accused for here, then they can refer to that as some kind of precedent, right? But it's not legal precedent yet. So if the SEC loses their appeal, then it would set legal precedent. So if that does happen, then it's off to the races, right? Because if there was one company that was going to be labeled, was going to be in violation of potential violation of securities laws, it would have been like one of the prime candidates would have been Ripple, right? And if the judge says, look, you went to the second court of appeals, but we're still siding with Judge Torres in this aspect, then it's going to set legal precedent, and then you're going to have a lot of other companies that were hesitant in maybe putting their products out there. It's kind of going to give them a sigh of relief, and it's going to give them the freedom to, it's like, okay, I think now because the laws and the regulations are a little bit more clear, now it's kind of their green light. Okay, now we can actually go ahead with our project because we don't have to worry about the SEC coming after us.
All right, so Jay, just real quick. So Judge Torres ruled that Ripple did violate
Yes.
When it comes to institutional money, correct?
Yes, that is correct. That is correct.
Okay, so what does the world look like? I want to fast forward 3 months, 6 months, maybe 9 months down the road. Let's say the final ruling comes out, and what happens is, yeah, Ripple violated institution, but not retail. What does that look like?
Well, I think they're going to have to pay a fine in that case, right? When it comes to the institutional sales, they're going to pay a fine, right? But what that's going to look like is, like I mentioned earlier, it's going to set some guidelines, right? Because now there are hard lines that you cannot cross. And because they now have legal precedent in this case, then you have all of these other companies who are trying to create a token and want to actually release a token out there. Maybe they want to list it on an exchange, or they want to keep it in DeFi, whatever, right? Now they have some solid guidelines to follow, right? So that they don't fall into the same traps as well, right? And then, obviously, a lot like the statutes of limitation is going to expire in some of these cases, right? Like look, like with Ethereum, right? How long ago was it when Ethereum did their ICO, right? There's a statute of limitations in that case, the same way that there's a statute of limitations with everything else as well, that is going to expire, and so you can't go after them in that case anymore, right? So I think in this case, what's going to happen is whether the SEC, whatever the result of this particular situation, right, is going to be, it's going to set some pretty concrete guidelines as far as what can you do as a company when you are creating a crypto asset, and what you cannot do, right? And so people aren't going to fall into the same traps that they did earlier, when this was still kind of when the rules and regulations were still so hazy in this space.
I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. You might not have the answer. This just might be a loaded question. And Brendan, if you want to hop in too, but did Ripple do anything drastically different than any other coin would do when it comes to selling to the institutional side? But because my line of thinking is, okay, well, the easiest thing to do would just be to copy what the others do.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? That's what I would think. Is Ripple, and again, like I said, you might not have the answer. It may be loaded. But did Ripple do something drastically different? Because I feel like either, this case is going to be in the spotlight, and the SEC, if that's the final decision, then the SEC will be able to go after pretty much every single coin issuer or whatever that followed in the same path as Ripple.
You know what it was? I think the SEC in general targeted Ripple because you know how within our space, the folks who are not fans of Ripple are not fans because they're very closely, intimately tied with institutions as a whole, right? And for people who are purists when it comes to cryptocurrency, right, it's kind of antithetical to the spirit of crypto, right? That you're going to get yourself involved with traditional finance like banks, right? And so because Ripple as a company kind of made it their mission to to become the bridge between crypto and the traditional market, it made them a very easy target for the SEC to come after, right? As far as what they did different, I'm not too sure, but I think the reason why the SEC came after them is because they made it very well known that they were the ones that going to be tied closely to the traditional financial market. And so they had a very big target on their back, and that's probably one of the main reasons why it's like, look, they're making it very easy for us to go after them, right? Because all of these other companies like Ethereum, they're talking about DeFi, they're talking about how they're going to be decentralized, and then you're over here, there's this company Ripple, and they're trying to evolve themselves with the traditional space, and that's a big no-no. So they kind of put a pretty big target on their back, and that's precisely what I think one of the main reasons why the SEC came after them. So I'm not sure if they did anything different. I'm kind of in the same line of thinking as you, right? That if you were going to do an ICO, right, why would you do it any differently from an IPO? If they did approach it that way, that might have been the pitfall, right? If they didn't consider that, if they were to approach an ICO the same way that a traditional company would approach an IPO, and they didn't consider the ramifications when it comes to violating potential securities laws, then that's where they might have made a mistake, right? Which is why you have a lot of these different companies coming out now. Like Richard Hart is a prime example. When he created his products, he was very specific about the language that he used when creating Hex and Pulse Chain, right? Because he didn't want to fall into the same traps as some of these earlier companies did. So,
yeah, I guess I can add a little bit to that. You know, the thing about Ripple is that the Ripple network is essentially, not essentially, but it's owned by a single company, right? It's not a decentralized platform like we see in most cryptocurrencies. I've said this previously, and I'll say it again. If there was to be a coin that could be considered a security, it's probably Ripple. Okay, so I'm just going to say that if anything is close to being a security from a centralized standpoint, it's probably something like XRP and Ripple, and that's because their goal is to be, a remittance payment between banks and financial institutions. So what they're doing is they're marketing and speaking to these financial institutions directly, rather than allowing for a decentralized parties to just purchase as they want to. So they actually want to be, a binding feature between banks and financial institutions for quick and easy payments. And so I think that it does make for a very different way that they are built than other cryptocurrencies. So even if say worst case scenario, everything goes against Ripple, which I don't think it's going to happen, what does that mean for the cryptos? Well, probably not as much as you might think, because Ripple, again, is built differently than a lot of decentralized platforms. And again, Torres already said, like Jay and I had alluded to earlier, that the investment contracts with institutions are problematic. And who are their biggest sellers? Who are they really trying to really become their main customers? And those are banks and financial institutions. So yes, if they took a step back and say, hey, we're not going to talk to these institutions directly, but if they want to buy and use our coin for payments, then that'd be great. So it is interesting, and Ripple is a little bit different from other cryptocurrencies because of how they're built and because of what they're actually trying to do, being an intermediary for essentially big companies. So yeah, I do think there's a difference between Ripple and almost all other cryptocurrencies. That doesn't mean that most of what they do is a security.
Good insight. All right, let's roll to the third topic. Give me 1 second to pull it up. All right, July 2023 CPI numbers have come out. Brendan, I don't want you to lose your mute button because I'm going to be coming to you first here. But so for the first time in 13 months, the CPI has accelerated on an annual basis. All right, the overall consumer price rose 3.2%, and the core CPI rose 4.7% compared to July 2022. The overall price rose 0.2% compared to last month. All right. However, the core CPI, which of course excludes food, it excludes energy, it fell 0.1% compared to last month. So, overall CPI, it ticked up. Core CPI is still showing a downward trend. Also, earnings increased 1.1% compared to last month, and homes rose 0.4% compared to last month. So, Brendan, is this a slight uptick in the overall something that we need to worry about, or is it pretty much on pace with, how we would be currently fighting inflation?
I mean, I think it's on pace of pretty much what we expected. The sticky number, which I've been talking about for months now, is that core CPI rate. Because if the, things like food and energy, which are very, very volatile, have any issues, then that's going to draw our inflation rate up pretty high again. And so really, if we can't get the core CPI rate down in a very fast manner, which we're not going to be able to, we've already alluded to that. Jerome Powell's alluded to that. Then we need to continue to be in an area where we cannot only reduce rates or stop rates, but I think we're still going to see at least one more increase in interest rates. And the reason that they're going to increase interest rates is not only because the CPI number and core inflation hasn't reduced enough. But again, if you listen to what Jerome Powell said in his last speech, he talked about the job market, and the strength of the United States job market has been very, very good. It's been much better than anticipated based on the increase in interest rates. And so if it continues to be that strong, then it's going to continue to be a driver for increased inflation. Because if the job market's strong, that means companies have less people to hire, which means that there is a lot more competition in the market, and therefore these companies need to pay people more money to work. And if you pay more people more money to work, there's going to be more money for them to spend into the general economy. And so that's a problem. Every time that we have seen large increases of inflation, and then subsequently large increases in raising of rates by the Fed, it's always been counteracted by a decrease in the labor market. A problem with the labor market, which is, increased unemployment, lower wages, and we just haven't seen that yet. So every single time that we've been able to reduce problematic inflation, it comes at the expense of workers. And so you're saying, so what you're telling me is that the government wants people to get laid off. They want people to make less money so that it drives inflation down. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm telling you. But I'm not telling you that. The government is telling you that exactly as well. It's not about the people right now. If they lay off 3% or 4% of the population, that's 96% of the population that is going to benefit in the future from less inflation. And in fact, the 4% that gets laid off will also benefit from that lower inflation. So, inflation is a very, very difficult thing for us to deal with. And it takes a lot longer for the policies that the Fed put into place, like raising interest rates, to us see that continued downtrend to the 2% interest rate that they're looking for. So, yeah, I still think we're going to see a bit of a sticky scenario with inflation for a while, because, again, it takes a while for the policies to take effect, right? It's like when you turn the cold water to hot water in your shower, it's not instantaneous. It takes a while for that water to change to the temperature that you want it to. And it's the same with the policies that happens with the Fed. The Fed, when it takes policies like raising interest rates, it's not an instantaneous change in the market. It takes time for those policies to affect the market. And so it's going to take a lot longer for this inflation to drop down. And again, if we see issues with the food and energy, then yeah, it's not only the core inflation rate that we're going to have a problem with, but it's the overall CPI numbers in the future. So they're still very worried about it.
We covered this a couple weeks ago when we talked about the FOMC meeting. And when Powell was directly asked, what if sticky inflation sticks around and, unemployment needs to go up in order to get that number down? What are you willing to do? And essentially Jerome Powell pretty much said, hey, we're willing to take the short-term higher unemployment if it means overall price stability comes back down in the long term. So you're absolutely right. Maximum labor, maximum employment versus price stability. Those are the two things that the Fed controls. Yeah, it's interesting. And Jay, I want to bring you in here. You know, why, do you have any insight on why the job market hasn't really reacted to the high inflation and the high interest rates that have been implemented by the Fed? Do you have any insight on that at all?
If I could think of one thing, it's probably because there was an extended amount of time where after the pandemic there was a ton of people who were laid off because there were a whole bunch of businesses that were closing down, and the ones that did stay open were laying off quite a considerable amount of their employees. And so the reaction of the federal government was, okay, we're going to have to one, give these people some of the stimulus checks that they sent out, and two, we're going to have to kind of extend some of these programs where we are going to help these people who can't find jobs. We're going to subsidize their living expenses, because we can't really we can't really have a mass exodus of people back into the workforce because of the pandemic, right? uh and I think because that specific program, right, people were still getting subsidized by the government to stay at home. And this is just a personal theory, I'm not sure if this is actually the truth, but a little like, this is a thought experiment that I've been playing around with my head, that if you encourage people to stay home, people are they're if you encourage people to stay home by paying them out and covering their living expenses, a lot of folks are going to take that, and they're not going to be incentivized to go back into the job market, right? And so when companies finally started opening back up again, they were like, okay, what can we do to incentivize people to come back into the labor force, right? Well, we're going to probably provide them with a pretty competitive wage, right? And so that's the reason why I think personally why you have such a big influx of people going back into the labor force, because not only are companies hiring left and right because they're trying to fill their teams back up again, but they're also providing incentive for people to come back to work, right, in the form of higher wages and probably other incentive packages that weren't necessarily in place before the pandemic happened. And so I think that's probably the reason why, despite the fact that the Fed has been raising interest rates, and so forth, right? That you haven't really seen the kind of effect that they wanted to, in terms of depressing the job market, right? And then depressing also like the wages. The government isn't going to say this outright, because it's a pretty it's anybody if you actually said that to somebody, they'd be like, wow, that's a pretty dick move, right? And you'd be right to say it. But the unfortunate reality is that has to happen to some degree for the economy to recover as a whole, right? It's one of the lesser of two evils, if you could think of it that way. So that's my personal theory. I'm not exactly sure if that's exactly how things are playing out, but it's a thought experiment that I've been playing around in my head, and I think it's a reasonable assumption to make.
Yeah, it definitely is. Hey, Will, we talked a couple weeks ago. The hardest industry hit during the COVID-19 pandemic was the hospitality, the restaurant industry. As you're traveling around from country to country, are you still seeing a lot of the old skeletons of restaurants and closed down shops and stuff like that? Or are you starting to see new businesses come in with new job opportunities? And, is what you're seeing, is that really what's taking place when we see, the unemployment number, how unemployment hasn't really gone up much? Are you starting to see those new businesses and more job opportunities? Or are you still seeing the old skeletons of the closed down businesses and stuff?
It's all skeletons, man. I haven't seen anything new really in the service industry pop up anywhere in the country that I've traveled around to. There might be some like there's still people building things. Like I drove through northern Dallas today, and like they're building these crazy, sky rises and like huge ass fucking buildings. But that's large scale stuff. That's not like little mom and pop restaurants. And the more of the service industry stuff, that's all like housing and permanent office structure and shit like that. So it's definitely a lot more dead in the country now. I think that is reflected well.
So, Brendan, where are these jobs coming from? Well, if he's still out there and he's still seeing the carcasses of old buildings and old businesses and restaurants that have died and, they were shut down during the pandemic, we're obviously not seeing that in the unemployment number. So where are these numbers coming from? Are these legit numbers? Are these legit percentages? Are they completely cooking the books? Or what sector are we seeing the job growth in?
Yeah, I don't think they're cooking it. I think these are legit numbers. And part of it is we see it in the inflation numbers, right? We see it in the sticky inflation. So first of all, when if you think of a recession, right, nothing in the last few years has been normal or standard. So how can we expect, as we have a recession or move into a recession, for that to be normal either, right? So I think it's a little bit difficult for us to fully understand the effects of all of our COVID policies that have happened in the past 2 to 3 years, and the effects that they're having, continue having on this economy now. So if we had in a 2-year span, say people from retirement age to 5 years younger, just saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to retire early. I don't want to get COVID. That was a big scare. I mean, look, even if you don't think COVID was a big thing, or if you think it was overblown, how many people were afraid of COVID was not overblown. And a lot of people did retire due to that happening. And so if you have years of people retiring early, that opens up a lot of increased need for workforce in our economy. And not only that, but our workforce is changing a lot. So what do I mean by changing? I mean that we're going from like a hard labor to a digitization, which means it's a lot more skilled labor. Turning a wrench to put something onto a factory line in the 50s and 60s in a car, that doesn't exist anymore. We need skilled labor a lot more because of how much more technical the jobs require, which means, right, there's going to be a lot more people fighting for these jobs, looking for qualified labor. So if these people that have been working in these industries for many years, especially the older boomers, they leave the workforce early, leaving a large opening in need for jobs, well, then the people that are left need to be hired or are going to be hired. So I think that COVID really had a unique play. And I don't think a lot of people have talked about the job market and how COVID had an effect on it. So we said, yeah, like you said, Jay, a lot of people got laid off. That was 100% true. A lot of people stopped working. So when these jobs opened back up, the people that are retired aren't coming back to the workforce, right? And so it's these people that are currently younger, more, tech savvy that are coming back and trying to either learn jobs that maybe they didn't know previously, but are being hired to do so because there's no one else left. And so it's a very unique dichotomy in how this works all together. But COVID had a huge factor in what we're seeing in the job market. And honestly, I'm not going to pretend that I fully understand it because I'm not an economist. I've studied economics. I studied at Harvard. I did study for quite a time. But again, I'm not an expert on the scenario. I'm not an expert on the situation. It's just a little bit of the insight that I have. But I do think that people do not understand fully that if people retire early, there's a huge gap in the workforce that needs to be hired. And so those people are trying to be hired. Now we're finding more tech jobs that need new people to, run their programs, run their, and again, that takes skilled labor. So it's a very unique situation in my opinion.
Yeah. And Cassie, I want to answer your question. It doesn't necessarily mean that inflation is going to get worse. It just means it's not going to get better if the numbers stay where they are. If this is sticky inflation, if we don't see very much movement on the unemployment numbers, and if the interest rates stay where they are, then it's just going to be laissez-faire continuing on down the path until something drastically changes. So in order for that inflation number to come down, in order for that percentage to come down to what the target goal is, you have to see the economy slow down to a point to where there isn't as much money in the system and it balances out. Brendan, did you want to add to that point at all?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I don't expect inflation to get worse. But I hate to say that 3 and change percent still not great. So we are not out of the woods. We're still struggling to reduce inflation. And while I don't think it's going to get worse per se, I think it's going to take a lot longer time than most people anticipate to get back down to that 2% level that we need it to be. And that's why I do think that there's one more rate hike coming in the future, maybe at the next meeting in September. Maybe not. We still have one more CPI number, one more jobs report to hit before that happens. But again, like you said, Josh, I don't think it's going to get worse. I think we're pretty much staying the same. And that's still a little bit worrisome. And that's why we could see another rate hike.
Yeah. Sorry, Josh. I just wanted to jump in real quick. I don't think we are going to get worse when you compare the numbers for this year compared to what it was last year. But I think, for example, moving from August to September, I think that we're probably going to see an uptick in the numbers, even if it's small. And I think what that's going to do is during the next Fed meeting, it's funny because when you look at the calendar of events, the next CPI numbers comes out the second week of September. And then the next Fed meeting is going to be the third week of September. And so what I'm thinking is, even if we see the numbers go up month over month, even if it's only slightly, then that's going to give Chair Powell the impetus to say, okay, I think this is when I unload the last bullet that I have in my chamber, and I'm going to raise it by that last 0.25 points. Right. And so I think that's exactly what's going to happen. So keep an eye out on the second week of September when the CPI numbers come out. And if we do get an uptick in both core inflation, whether it's month to month or year to year, I think that's going to provide JP the impetus to use the last bullet that he has. And so I think we're definitely going to see at least one more rate hike, and that's probably going to be very likely the next Fed meeting. And you could just kind of predict this. It's funny because before the last meeting, right, I was looking at the prices around my neighborhood, and I'm looking, okay, it seems like all of these prices, whether it's the cost of transportation, the cost of gasoline, the cost of goods and services, it might not seem crazy when you consider that, oh, gas went up from, at least here in Arizona, it was like at the very bottom, it was like $3.20. And then it started climbing back up to $3.40, $3.50. And then you notice those small price discrepancies across all of these other avenues, like in other goods and services that you might spend on. And even without looking at the data, I was like, okay, next CPI, it's probably going to be up a little bit. And I'm noticing the exact same pattern again, right? The cost of gasoline and transportation has been slowly increasing. Same thing with the cost of food. Same thing with the cost of rent. It's slowly starting to increase again. So I'm thinking to myself, you know what? Even without looking at the data, it seems like we're probably going to have our September numbers, right? Which is going to be for the month of August. When those numbers comes out in September, we're probably going to have a slight increase again. And that's probably going to make JP increase our rates one last time.
Something else to keep in mind, 2 key points. Number one is the June CPI number at 3%. That came in well below what was expected.
Way below.
So that was way below. So, if that number came in at 3.3, then we'd be sitting here right now saying, hey, inflation's still coming down. You know what I'm saying? So, when you put it in that sort of context, it definitely balances out. Another key aspect is I think, we have been steadily trending down. There's no denying that. We have been steadily trending down. And maybe the talk about inflation sticking at this point is a little too premature. We just don't have enough data yet. I think it probably by quarter 1 of 2024, we'll be able to get a better idea of if we're heading towards a stagflation sort of environment, or if this if the inflation is starting to come down, if the controls that the Fed are putting in place are actually doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. But yeah, I would say by Q1 of 2024, if we're still, sticking around a 3%, maybe a 3.5, and we're sitting at 550 basis points, then we might be looking at going into a muffled stagflation period, which would absolutely suck. It would definitely be something to worry about, but I'm not sounding those alarms yet. Nobody's sounding them yet. It's just something to keep in mind. It's always good to have that knowledge. Hey, what does stagflation look like? Stagflation looks like high interest rates and high inflation. It's exactly what the United States went through in the late 60s into the 70s. All right. War and butter. That's what the United States government spent the money on, the Vietnam War and all the social programs. And then the next thing you know, we come off the gold standard in 71. We have the devaluation of the dollar. Interest rates go up. Inflation goes up. So that's what a stagflation period looks like. I'm not saying that we would get to a point like the 1970s. We might get a small microcosm of that if the numbers don't adjust, but again, we're still probably 6 months away from having a better idea of where that's going to be. But with that, you guys got any final comments before we go ahead and pivot to the last story?
Yeah, I'd only say that stagflation, for that to happen, we'll need to see again an increase in unemployment. So until we see a higher increase in unemployment, because that should drive down inflation, right? But the problem is if we start to see unemployment rise and we don't see this sticky numbers of inflation decline, that's what you're talking about, Josh, when we get into that period of stagflation. So lower economic growth, higher unemployment, and still, higher than wanted inflation. And yeah, that could be something that we see, and that would be fairly scary because we need this inflation number to come down. It's hurting everyone.
Yeah. What I would be interested to see is if during the next year or so, the AI technology really starts running, and then you have a lot of automation occurring where it eliminates a lot of the unskilled labor that you spoke about earlier, Brendan. I think that would actually provide the impetus for the decrease in the job market that the Fed is looking for, right? I'm personally, over the past year, I've seen a lot more gas stations and fast food restaurants. They're only manned by like one person at a time. If it's like a high crime rate, there might be one person running the register and then management that's in the back. But for the most part, a lot of these smaller, like for example, the Circle K's here, a lot of them are being run. A lot of them have the self-checkout machines, right? Fast food restaurants like McDonald's, they have the self-checkout machines, right? And then you have a few people in the back creating the orders. And so as we move towards a very automated AI-centric environment where a lot of the machines can do the unskilled labor that an overwhelming majority of people used to be able to do, then I could probably see it moving towards the type of environment that the federal government is looking for, which is a decrease in the job market. So if I were going to plan for that, that's why I always encourage people, you have to find a marketable skill outside of your labor, because the unfortunate reality is stuff like AI and automation, that's coming a lot quicker than you guys think. And computers can do things faster and better than most of us can. That's just the unfortunate reality, right? And we cannot stop it, right? That technology is coming. Companies are adopting it left and right. So it's really motivating, at least personally, to try and acquire as many new skills as I possibly can, because otherwise, man, that's not looking good for us.
Well, what's scary about that is that's no longer a temporary solution, right? It's not a temporary thing to get that unemployment number up. That would pretty much be a shift in the magnitude of the work environment, and it would pretty much be permanent at that point. But With that being said, let's go ahead and transition to our fourth and final topic of the night. If you guys haven't already, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you guys are commenting on the video, and make sure you guys are subscribed for all the future content. Give me one quick second here. All right. Sam Bankman-Fried back in the news. So SBF, he's been under house arrest at his parents' home in California since he was arrested in December on fraud charges. Federal judge ended that arrangement after Bankman-Fried tried to intervene with witnesses in the case. Federal witnesses on two different occasions. First occasion, Sam Bankman-Fried provided documents to the New York Times in order to try to intimidate his girlfriend and Alameda Research CEO, Caroline Ellison. The second attempt was he sent several text messages to a former FTX executive asking to meet up. And there's been various other demonstrations of him sort of walking up to the line of what's allowed and what's not allowed. So SBF received a temporary gag order after talking to the media, and it's pretty much prevented him from speaking to the media. Will, I want to pull you in here. This is just the latest little bit of drama in a just completely cascading mountain of, ugliness when it comes to what happened with Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX and all that stuff. You said you were looking forward to talking about this segment when we were doing pre-show. What comes to mind? What's your opinion on, pretty much this latest saga, this latest event?
I am glad that this little rat is getting flushed down the toilet. I don't know what's actually going to happen realistically. I do not have high expectations or high hopes for any sort of justice from the Justice Department, especially when it comes to large scale Democrat and Republican monetary donors for campaigns and all sorts of things. So I don't know if he's going to end up being the fall guy. I don't know if he's going to sit in jail till his trial time comes, or if they're going to pull him out of this little thing that he's been put under since he's not allowed to be on house arrest anymore, or what's going to go on. But I do like watching people squirm that I think deserve to squirm. So hopefully he's squirming in a nice cold jail cell. Or maybe this is all just a big front. Maybe this is like, hey, here you go, people, have some little sprinkles of like hope and dreams. Daddy government's gonna put a little bit of salt on your meat for you here. I'm not exactly sure if this is real. I'm not sure if he's going to fry for his crimes. I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I do like seeing a dude get led away in chains. So at the very least, I've got a nice, warm little fuzzy in my heart.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, go ahead. No, you go ahead. You go ahead, please.
What I just found funny was that there's a back and forth between him and Caroline, because now they're sitting in opposition to each other, right? Where Caroline is supposedly going to testify against SBF, probably as part of her appeal, right? So that she gets a reduced sentence. And so Sam is over here releasing her diary, her diary entries, right, to the New York Times and to the public. And so what they're basically claiming is that, look, Sam is trying to intimidate other potential witnesses from coming forward, because if this is exactly the kind of thing that's going to happen, then anybody who may want to testify against him is probably going to have a little bit more reservation, because now there's a threat of, whoa, I don't want my personal business out there, because then the federal government might come after me. And so that's probably why they're like, okay, we got to put a gag order on this guy so that he doesn't keep talking, right? What's funny is that even though they had the gag order on him, it just, like, the audacity of this person, right? It's like, oh, Uh, yeah, I'm potentially going to serve a life in prison, but you know, $250 million bail, that's totally fine. My parents can take care of it. I've got enough money. Although he did say that he doesn't know what happened to all of those user funds, right? But he has $250,000 sitting in the bank to post his bail. Uh, and then to be so arrogant as to toe the line of what is allowed for him to say, uh before his trial, it's just it just makes me laugh, because if this is the kind of behavior that you could expect from somebody like this, right? It's like, that's why it's not really surprising that to me when Will is fairly cynical about the kind of justice that might be served for this guy, because it seems like they're so hands off with how they're treating him, right? And so it's funny to me when I observe somebody like this and how they act, despite the fact that they're going to potentially face a lifetime in prison, but they're still so careless in how they conduct themselves. So I just thought that was hilarious, man. And you know that she's not a ride or die, because she's going to testify against him in court, man. She ain't about that life.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Jay. First of all, the bail was 250 million. 250 million. Yeah, no one has that sitting around. Bail's so wonky. Everything's just, pieces of paper written, and you can say that, yeah, I'll pay in case, he dips the country. Bail's kind of BS in some cases, but yeah, crazy. Also, you talk about how much money his parents have. Why does his parents have hundreds of millions of dollars sitting around? I wonder why. Yeah, he's taking all of this money that he had and he's funneling it to his parents and probably to other people, so that in case he ever gets caught up with the law because he knows what he was doing was wrong, that there's still a lot of money sitting out there that he isn't attached to, right? And so his parents having hundreds of millions of dollars in real estate, hundreds of millions of dollars probably in the bank. I don't know for sure, so I can't say that realistically, but I know that hundreds of millions of dollars exist. And it's crazy to think that this person who, like you said, is so just full of himself that he has no worries about repercussions, right? It's like he's been doing all of these crazy things with people's money, with all of this stuff that all this business deals that were totally illegal, allowing his girlfriend Alameda Research to take all this money from us. I'm not saying me personally, I didn't invest in them, but us as consumers, us as individuals, and loan that out to someone that's literally playing Russian roulette with their money. That is crazy. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that he's also out here trying to play, hardball with people and intimidate people into not talking, because he's already feeling like he's been above the law way before this. And like Will said, we'll see if he's really above the law. If it was me personally, I think his minimum sentence should be 20 years if everything is true. I don't want to say without someone being tried and found guilty. But if he is found guilty of the crimes that he's purported to have committed, which is very likely that they are true, I think that minimum should be 20 years, if not quite a bit more. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, the audacity about him trying to intimidate witnesses. What does he have to lose at this point? I mean, not much. And he already had the audacity previously. So yeah, he feels like he's above everything.
Yeah, when you consider that anybody else in his position, his lawyers are probably like, look, Sam, you probably need to be under the radar and not to draw any more attention to yourself than what is absolutely necessary, because you're already under so much heat. But this guy thinks that he is going to get away scot-free, or maybe he thinks it's so above the law that his money can solve everything, that he's going to be this careless with his approach, right? And be so obvious in how he's interacting with news outlets, because he thinks he's untouchable or whatever it might be, that it's funny to see this play out IRL, right? Because you kind of see this stuff in movies, you might read about it in fiction, right? But when you see a character like him in real life act the way that he does, you're just like, wow, that people like this really fucking exist, dude. The people that have so much money and they're like so sociopathic that they think that they're just above the law, right? That they can get away with anything because they could just buy their way out of anything. So
This is so much fun. I love that this is happening. I'm glad to be witness like through a glass box and see this historical moment play out. Like what a shining beacon of entertainment in these dark and trying times. What do you got, Josh? What do you think about all this?
That's a good question. I think that there needs to be, I don't think there can be enough headlines about the downfall of FTX and Alameda Capital. You know, you got to give it to the guy. The guy, I think that he's a marketing genius to be able to do what he did during the bull run in 2021, you know, incorporating Tom Brady, incorporating Larry David, and being up on stage with Bill Clinton and Tony Blair, and just the popularity that this guy got. He is a marketing genius, or he had somebody in his corner that is an absolute marketing genius. But what the guy did at the end of the day is completely shitty. And the fact that he tried to stick to the script for so long, and you had investigative reporters that were interviewing this guy, and like, this doesn't make sense. The stuff that you're saying, it didn't make sense. And it's just, you know, I think that full justice should be done, because I think it's essential for the future of the cryptocurrency space, and how bad actors are always going to come, and they need to have some sort of deterrent in place. So I am all for the Justice Department going as hard as they can, you know, in order to set a solid precedent here. Now, of course, I'm all about, you know, innocent until proven guilty, all day, every day. I think the evidence is there to show that this guy at least intended to defraud the investors. He intended to defraud those that were doing business on his platform. So that's pretty much my comments on that. So what I want to do now is, if anybody has any final comments on Sam Bankman-Fried, go ahead and let them speak now. And then Will, I want to give you the opportunity to plug your stuff and let everybody know what you're talking about. But before that, Brendan, Jade, you guys have anything else to comment on this topic?
yeah, I got one more thought actually. Is
Yeah,
that
go ahead, man.
I'm really interested to see how they're going to handle Gary Gensler's relationship with his family is, right? Because for somebody who reports himself to want to come after the bad actors in this space, you had such an intimate relationship with both Sam and his family, and yet you couldn't suss out the snakes that were sleeping in the same bed as you. So I'm pretty interested to see how the prosecutors in this case are going to address his relationship with Gary, or even if they're going to address it at all, right? So I'm really interested to see how that's going to play out, because that's one of the things that's really getting me upset. Because for somebody who says that they are for the American people, and yet you did nothing against this guy who you had such intimate relationships with him and with his family, and you did absolutely zero things about it. And you're telling me, with how strict you are with vetting these different companies, that you saw nothing wrong whenever you were looking at their books? Man, that's probably one of the things that really does not sit well with me in terms of this case, right? Obviously, the defrauding the American people is a pretty big deal, right? But his relationship with Gary, and how it seems like nobody's kind of going after Gary in terms of the lack of action that he took on his part. That's probably one of the things that's really leaving a sour taste in my mouth. So.
Well, he got played like a fool, and I think that's a lot of what's behind his current assault on crypto. Is He's trying to divert the attention because he knows that he got caught. Gensler, had a very intimate relationship, and they had conversations that weren't recorded through official channels and such. And it wouldn't shock me if the current assault that's going on various coins is in part to deflect from that. Brendan, what are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I think those are good points. Is it willful ignorance, or is it straight up I don't care? It's very interesting that Gary Gensler is still in a position to be running the SEC. I have no idea from an ethical standpoint how he can still have conversations about crypto and literally be someone that should be, standing back and making a decision that has no emotion in it. I don't know how he can currently make an unemotional decision, because he, like you said, Jay, was very good friends with SBF. They had conversations, like you said, Josh, off the record that should have been on the record, that should have been in emails, in writing. And so, yeah, not only does he not care about the American people, not only does he not care about you and I, but, I think it goes deeper than that. I think he cares more about things that might hurt us than help us. And I don't want to get into anything that could be considered a conspiracy theory or anything like that. But if you just look at how he's done his job since he's been in position, and so he's been a head of SEC, I mean, how can you, as a head of SEC, consider crypto to be a potential security? Oh, wait, by the way, first of all, he used to say Ethereum wasn't a security. Now he says it is a security. So, I don't know, take him for whatever you think that he says and whatever you think that he says is truthful. But how can he be even friends with someone that's in this position to be potentially selling illegal securities, frauding investors, and having no back-end retribution from a government standpoint, from an SEC standpoint, so yeah, there's no reach from the government to help us. And it's surprising to me that Gary Gensler is still the head of the SEC. And honestly, I don't think he will be for much longer. I've been on this boat for a couple months now that it's seeming like it's leaning towards him being ousted. But I'll be honest, it's not soon enough. He's causing a lot of problems, and not because I'm just into crypto and that I think that crypto should be regulated properly, but that I think that he doesn't have our best interests at hand. And it's very clear based on his relationships, based on how he is running his little part of the government, that there's a problem between him and us. The SEC should be helping us. They're out here to help people not get wrecked, right? That's generally their overall job. And if he's allowing his friendship to get in the way of his job, if that's the case, then that's a problem. If he's allowing his friendship to get in the way of him even understanding what his job is supposed to be, that is also a problem. So either way you slice it, Gary's got to go.
Yeah, for sure. If you look at it in any other industry too, like for example, let's say a sports team, right? If you lose a championship, the first person to always be let go is the head coach, right? Because you can't blame your players. Like the buck always stops with you. If you're the one leading that industry, you're always responsible at the end of the day, right? If your players make a mistake, they're going to point the finger at you and said, you should have handled this better. You should have coached them better. You should have created better plays. You should have paid more attention to them in practice, in trading, etc. Like the buck always stops with you. Same thing with like a company, right? If a company goes and makes a big financial decision that turns sideways on them, it's like you're not going to be able to blame your employees. If you're the CEO, like the buck is going to stop with you, right? So like you said, Brendan, it's kind of surprising how Gary Gensler is not being treated in the same way, right? Because if he's supposed to be the leader in this industry, right, and helping regulate fraudulent companies and businesses like SAM and FTX, then how come he's not being held to the same degree of responsibility, right? Like anybody else in a position of power would be, right? Look at the president of the United States. If shit hits the fan, you can't say, well, it was Congress or it was Senate, right? You're the president. You're the leader of the you're the leader of the most powerful nation in the world. You can't point the finger and blame everybody else. and you're the one that's going to be held responsible. So how come that's not being like? How come he's not being held to the same standard? Like that's like I was mentioning earlier. That's why it's leaving such a sour taste in my mouth. Because anybody else in any other industry would play out. Look, you're the one leading this place, and you let it come down to this. Sorry, man, we gotta go. Like you gotta go. So
I've got a plan. I've got a plan for this. All right, and this will start the sign off sequence here. My plan is, we wanted to talk about what we're gonna do next and things. Is I'm gonna start a GoFundMe to get Gary Gensler put on a shit ton of TRT and a whole bunch of steroids and shit, and hopefully that will turn him into a better person. And then we also get the benefit of seeing, Gary Gensler get ripped. And maybe I could start one also for SBF, get them both just jacked and juicy, and hopefully that'll turn them into better human beings and stuff. But that's all I got going on for me in the near future. Other than that, you can find my socials down in the description below. Mr. Brendan, let's hop on over to you, buddy. What do you got going on?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. We couldn't do this without people watching, and we're excited to see where this channel is going to go in the next couple of weeks. We're hoping to. I've gotten a lot of requests from friends and from people interested in hearing our content, but maybe aren't able to watch on YouTube per se, just because they are more podcast associated. So over the next few weeks, we are looking to add our channel to some podcast platforms, and so we will be working on that. I'd love to get us first on things like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, things like that, so that you can watch us while you're driving, when you're on an airplane, whatever the case may be. But we really make this content to help the people and to bring you news and understanding and knowledge, so that you don't run into the same pitfalls that a lot of the normies and the people in this industry do, be it just financial in general, be it crypto, whatever the case may be. We want to get our content out there to help people and to be, more self-sufficient and take responsibility for their well-being, for their wealth, and for their future. And if we can put our content on more platforms to help more people, that is our goal. So please join our Telegram and share our content with your friends, because I know that the episodes from 5 to 20 are very hard to increase new viewers in a fast period of time. But we have some new guests coming up, some really great guests in the crypto community. So keep an eye out for those shows. But we're not going anywhere. We're going to keep producing content. We are very dedicated to helping people free of charge, and we are excited that you are here, and we're excited for the future. So hop on the train and let's go to the moon.
Jay, what you got?
yeah, guys, like always, thank you for spending a little bit of your time with us. We know that it's your most valuable asset, so we do appreciate that you spend some of that time with us here for 2 hours listening to us just cover the news in crypto. You could find me on Instagram at agent_J Schroth, on Twitter at _P90Hex. I won't be here next week. I have a wedding to attend. I'm going back home to Jersey to be the best man in my best friend's wedding. And so I will try to jump in if we have any other shows during the week. I will try to be there. I will be in the chat, though, during that weekend. And as far as what you can expect from us, I think Brendan pretty much covered it. Over the next few weeks, we're going to have a lot of cool guests coming on the show to give you their insights from their fields of expertise. Please look forward to us releasing this show onto your favorite podcast streaming platforms in audio format. And once again, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And until next Sunday.
Yeah, we're definitely going to have a couple pretty cool guests that are going to be coming and joining us over the next couple weeks. So definitely, you guys, make sure you're paying attention to that. Also, I know I'm going to be working with Will. We're going to be putting together the ground level, the foundational pieces for a DR Insights that we're planning on doing maybe in a couple weeks. So putting together that with Will and yep. So that's what I got coming up. And of course, active in the Telegram group and definitely active when it comes to the behind the scenes stuff, putting up clips and all that sort of stuff. So that's what I'm going to have coming up this week. Panel, I want to thank you guys. Awesome job tonight. Thank you so much for just hopping on and sharing the wisdom that you have. Jen, we want to give you a thank you behind the scenes. You did a great job tonight. You definitely make it a lot easier. So thank you so much for being behind the scenes and producing. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Make sure you guys stay up to date on all of our content. Make sure you guys are in our Telegram. If you go into the description, you'll find the Telegram link. If you haven't joined already, make sure you guys go ahead and join that Telegram. Also, you guys can find us on all the social medias. So we want to thank you guys so much for watching. Those that are watching live, thank you so much for hanging out with us. If you guys are catching this on the replay, make sure you tune in 8 o'clock on Sundays. Also hit that notification bell so you can see when we have any impromptu AMAs or anything like that. So with that being said, thank you guys so much. We'll see you guys back here again next Sunday at 8 o'clock, unless we decide to pop on and we have some more stuff to talk about, some special AMAs, or we have an impromptu DR Insights. But if that's not the case, we'll see you guys back here on Sunday at 8 o'clock. With that being said, you guys have a good night. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.